Poor Guy Sebastian today, victim of what the left has now developed, perhaps the great threat to our intellectual life. You might not think that Guy, well, anyway, I won't go there. It's this cancel culture, and it works like this. If you hear opinions now that you don't like, it's no longer enough to ignore them or to argue back, or heaven forbid, change your own mind. No, now, if you hear opinions that you don't like, what you must do now in this cancel culture is ban them, silence the speaker, get them sacked, get them punished, or follow them down the street screaming abuse, as was done to writer Peter Hitchens 2 weeks ago. Today, another example. Singer Guy Sebastian was invited by fellow Christian Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, to join his press conference announcing that $250 million rescue package for the arts, and to thank Morrison on behalf of all artists.
Thank you so much, and thanks for hearing us on behalf of myself as an artist, but also people like Adam, who's here today. We're really appreciated we appreciate it that you haven't forgotten us and that we're thought of.
Now, why Guy Sebastian chose to speak for all artists, I'm not sure, and I barely care. Prefer it was an opera singer, but there you go. But wow, the abuse online. There was the jealousy for a start. Why was Sebastian speaking when he wasn't an artist, starving in a garret and down to his last sock? Like, why was a successful artist speaking for the industry instead of someone who's never made it and never will? But there were also tweets like this from a poet. This is the cancel culture speaking. Today was going to be fine, but now I have to break it to my 9-year-old that Guy Sebastian is a scab as we delete all his songs from her Apple Music. That is the authentic voice of the cancel culture. If Guy Sebastian says one nice thing about a Liberal, even a Liberal handing artists $250 million, then you can't even let your daughter listen to his songs. Joining me is Mark Latham, former federal Labor leader and now One Nation leader in the New South Wales Parliament. Mark Latham, always great to catch up with you again to say this cancel culture and the intolerance which this is an example. You've been warning of this for years, haven't you?
Well, absolutely, Andrew. It's an authoritarian movement, and this is clearly an example of left-wing offenderati racism against a person of colour. I thought black artists matter. Black artists like Guy Sebastian should matter, shouldn't they? These people aren't really about racial tolerance or any form of tolerance in society. They're not about diversity. They're after one homogenous political viewpoint. That is, we've all got to agree with them. And I don't think for a moment today, Guy Sebastian, who's had, quite a great distinguished career in the Australian music industry, starting when he won the Australian Idol, got himself up there and had a go and won. I don't think for a moment today he thought he was making any political statement. Wouldn't he have thought all those artists who've been whinging on Twitter and elsewhere, they haven't been getting financial support from the federal government, they'd be happy that here came a big wad of federal government money, a subsidy to them. But Andrew, it does make a point, doesn't it? Perhaps these artists are whinging about it, the offenderati, if they spent less time on Twitter with all their virtue signalling and cancel culture statements, and more time actually trying to make an income, they wouldn't need this massive subsidy in the first place. And perhaps Scott Morrison should turn around and say, all you whingers out there who didn't like the announcement today, you're ineligible for the scheme. So, you can't win. They're all complaining they've been left out, They want the $250 million subsidy. When it drops in their lap, they're still miserable sods.
Well, look, I think the mistake was made when they started calling it the arts industry. Art is art and industry is something else. It's not an industry. If you haven't got it, we're not going to employ you. And I would have thought, seeing as our money from taxpayers to them, a big thank you from every single artist to taxpayers might have been appropriate. But talking about the cancel culture phenomenon here, there's so many examples now. I'm going to list tomorrow's program an astonishing list, but here's a couple. Channel 9 the other day dumping veteran Sam Newman for pointing out that George Floyd, killed by US police, was actually a long-time criminal, and Sam also called him names, which wasn't that nice. But or in Britain, a politician and charity worker, Emma Nicholson, now sacked as an honorary trustee of the Booker Prize, Britain's top literary prize. And why? Because she didn't support gay marriage and was rude to an abusive transgender model. I mean, what do you make of all this? Where is this going to stop?
Well, for this cancel culture mob, views aren't optional. There's no such thing as freedom, no such thing as liberal democracy. It's all compulsory. It's compulsory to support gay marriage. Otherwise, you're harassed out of the public square and defunded and cancelled as a person, as a performer, as an author. And, you know, the main problem is, Andrew, for normal people, politics is an interest, but it's not an obsession. Normal people take an interest in the democratic process, follow the issues that they're interested in. But for the left wing, all of life is politics. All of life is a political obsession. So when you're eating coon cheese, that's politics. When you're playing a game of chess, apparently, that's politics. When you're having a refreshing colonial beer, that's all politics. So for these obsessives who quite frankly, you know, we talk about mental health, these people have got mental illness problems where you need a balanced life, you know, you need a range of interests instead of thinking every single thing you see in the shopping aisle, every single thing, a board game that you might play, every single thing that you hear musically, Guy Sebastian, whatever, is the subject of a political statement, a nasty political obsession. So we're not talking about normal people here. We're not talking about people who've even got a balanced sense of their mental health. These are oddballs who want the world to be like them, and they're in a sad state. And the abuse of Guy Sebastian today, the absurdity of the artist whinging for the money, now complaining about the money, pretty well says it all.
Well, you know, I'm not a big fan of Friedrich Nietzsche, but I have to think that he might have been on the ball. I think if he's seen this, he would say this is a revolt of the failures against the strong, this cancel culture. They can't make it themselves, so they've got to squash someone that they think's a threat to their own little worldview. But something I particularly wanted to talk to you today about, Mark, the multicultural slogan, you know, our diversity is our strength. Now, I never understood that, and I wonder now if it can ever be said to be true. And the Victorian government says that one reason for the virus outbreak in that state is that it couldn't get its health messages out to suburbs with lots of immigrants, up to 60% immigrants, even though it translated these messages into 53 languages and advertised in 22 of them. What do you conclude from that?
Well, you know, it's a betrayal of the original ideas of multiculturalism. When Whitlam and Fraser spoke about this in the 1970s, yes, it was to be diversity, but also diversity with active citizenship and participation. That migrants, new arrivals here were to speak English. Why? For the common sense reason that was participation in society. Better chance to get a job, talk to your neighbours, talk to other ethnic groups, longer standing Australian groups, get to know each other, build trust and commonality, the shared interests of a nation in common. Now, we've lost sight of that. You know, governments haven't put much of a premium on people speaking English, and now there's this weird syndrome out there. If you watched any of the ABC coverage of this story yesterday, their view was there was no problem that the migrants didn't speak English and couldn't understand the public health information. It was the fault of the government for not translating it into 100 different languages and getting it out in this customised language to every single household that it suited. So the ABC view was that people can, go around society not understanding public health messages. That's not the problem itself. You've got to change the nature of the message. Now, we've got to get back to the original ideals of multiculturalism, that speaking English is good. Speaking English is a necessity to participate, to be active, to be successful in our Australian society. And we should be promoting that. More than promoting it, we should be expecting it.
Yeah, well, I still remember that Vox Pop that you did when you walked down Fairfield in Sydney, and you're asking people, do you speak English? How many? I don't speak it. No. It was just incredible how few had any English to just walking down the street. And it reminds me, you know, a recent census data saying that the percentage of new arrivals we take in who've got little or no English jumped from 19% to 24%, that's nearly a quarter of the immigrants, in 10 years. A quarter of arrivals, little or no English. And they then settle in ethnic enclaves where a lot of people speak their language. They don't need them to speak English. Satellite dishes get their TV from their home country. It's very hard to get messages or any languages, messages in any languages really through that bubble. Tribalising is the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's an uncomfortable truth, Andrew. Good on you for saying something that is an observable truth in our society. But the main point is you're not helping the newly arrived migrants by saying English doesn't matter. Because how do people get a job? How do they help their kids with schoolwork and make them a success in life? How do they participate and extend themselves beyond their immediate neighbourhood and have a full life in our wonderful country? Like, I mean, if you're moving around Australia with no English, it's a bit limiting, isn't it? You're not fulfilling your full potential.
I know.
Economically, socially, culturally. I mean, it's a dreadful thing that so many people have been left without English skills, and now the attitude of it's the government's fault, it's the fault of the message, rather than the necessity. As Whitlam and Fraser said, everyone should learn English, get to know each other, have active citizenship and participate in our country. Diversity plus participation, and we've lost sight of that second part of the equation.